The security guard laughed when she asked to enter the officer's promotion ceremony, pointing toward the family seating area like she was just another civilian guest. The protocol officer barely glanced up when she tried to explain her invitation, dismissing her with directions to the visitor center. But when her coat shifted during the argument and General Harrison glimpsed the pale blue ribbon with 13 white stars pinned inside her jacket, the entire auditorium fell into stunned silence. That ribbon represented the nation's highest military honor, and suddenly everyone realized they had been turning away a living legend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning carried the sharp bite of autumn as Master Sergeant Isabella Cruz approached the imposing facade of the Eisenhower Convention Center at Fort Richardson. At 41, she moved with the measured stride of someone who had learned to conserve energy for battles that mattered, her weathered hands tucked deep in the pockets of a charcoal wool coat that had seen better seasons but remained dignified in its simplicity. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, pulled back in a practical style that required no mirror adjustments, and her brown eyes held the kind of steady focus that came from years of making decisions under pressure. The convention center buzzed with the controlled excitement of a major military ceremony. Staff vehicles lined the circular drive, their occupants hurrying between assignments with the purposeful energy of people ensuring that every detail met exacting standards. The American flag snapped crisp and proud in the morning wind, flanked by the colors of various military branches that would be represented in the day's promotion ceremony. Through the tall glass windows, Cruz could see uniformed personnel arranging chairs, testing sound equipment, and conducting the final preparations that would transform the space into a venue worthy of celebrating military advancement. She paused at the base of the concrete steps, adjusting the strap of a simple black purse that contained the invitation she had received 3 weeks earlier. The envelope had arrived at her modest apartment off base, addressed in the formal script that military communications reserved for significant occasions. Inside, embossed letterhead had announced the annual Fort Richardson Officer Advancement Ceremony, with her name printed among those invited to witness the recognition of distinguished service and leadership. The invitation had surprised her. During her 18 months stationed at Richardson, she had maintained a deliberately low profile, working quietly in the base education center, where she helped soldiers pursue college degrees and professional certifications. Her colleagues knew her as reliable and knowledgeable, someone who could navigate bureaucratic obstacles and advocate effectively for students facing academic challenges. But she had shared little about her background, beyond the basic biographical details that her position required. 2 security guards flanked the main entrance, their uniforms pressed to regulation perfection and their expressions carrying the alert attention of personnel responsible for controlling access to an important event. Specialist Rodriguez stood to the left of the doors, checking names against a computerized list displayed on a tablet, while Sergeant First Class Thompson positioned himself to examine identification and direct visitors toward appropriate seating areas. Cruz climbed the steps with unhurried confidence, reaching into her purse to retrieve both her military identification card and the ceremony invitation. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing civilian clothes that struck an appropriate balance between respect for the formal nature of the event and her current non-uniformed status. Her black slacks were pressed and professional, her white blouse was clean and conservative, and her coat provided both warmth and the kind of understated dignity that seemed appropriate for witnessing other people's achievements. Rodriguez looked up from his tablet as she approached, his expression shifting through the automatic assessment that security personnel performed countless times each day. He saw civilian clothing, middle-aged woman, calm demeanor categories that suggested family member or guest rather than military participant. "Good morning, ma'am. he said with professional courtesy. "Are you here for the ceremony?" "Yes," Cruz replied simply, extending her identification and invitation toward him. Rodriguez accepted the documents and began the verification process, scanning her identification card with a handheld device that would confirm its authenticity against military databases. The machine beeped softly, displaying information that caused him to pause and read more carefully than usual. "Master Sergeant Cruz," he said, his tone carrying a note of surprise. "You're listed as Education Center staff?" "That's correct." He looked at the invitation more carefully, noting that it was addressed to her personally rather than issued as a general notification to base personnel. "This ceremony is primarily for field-grade officer promotions. Are you attending as family or as a representative of the Education Center?" The question carried an undertone of confusion, as if Rodriguez was trying to understand why a non-commissioned officer working in an administrative capacity would receive a personal invitation to an event focused on celebrating officer advancement. Cruz recognized the puzzlement, but felt no obligation to provide detailed explanations about circumstances she didn't fully understand herself. "I received an invitation," she said simply, gesturing toward the document he held. Thompson had drifted closer during this exchange, his attention caught by Rodriguez's apparent uncertainty about how to categorize this particular visitor. At 34, Thompson had worked security details for numerous military ceremonies and had developed reliable instincts about which situations required additional scrutiny and which could be processed routinely. "Problem?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came from senior enlisted personnel, comfortable with supervisory responsibility. Rodriguez handed him the identification and invitation. "Master Sergeant Cruz has a personal invitation, but she's assigned to the Education Center. I'm not sure about seating protocols." Thompson examined the documents with the careful attention of someone trained to notice discrepancies or irregularities that might suggest security concerns. The identification card was clearly authentic, recently issued, and contained all appropriate security features. The invitation was printed on official letterhead and appeared to be legitimate ceremonial correspondence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Have you attended Fort Richardson ceremonies before, Master Sergeant?" Thompson asked, his tone suggesting professional interest rather than suspicion. "No, this is my first invitation." Thompson looked at the seating chart displayed on Rodriguez's tablet, scanning through sections designated for different categories of attendees. Officers being promoted sat in the front rows, their families occupied designated areas to the left, and base personnel invited to witness the ceremony were assigned to sections toward the rear of the auditorium. Education Center staff would typically be seated in Section C, Thompson said, pointing toward the back of the venue. "That's where we're directing civilian employees and support personnel." The classification struck Cruz as reasonable, though. She noticed that Thompson's language subtly grouped her with civilian employees rather than acknowledging her status as active-duty military personnel. She understood that her civilian clothing and administrative assignment created natural assumptions about her role and significance within the base hierarchy. "Section C is fine," she said, accepting the seating assignment without argument. Rodriguez returned her identification and invitation, along with a small paper badge that would identify her as an authorized attendee. "The ceremony begins at 1000 hours. Seating starts at 0930. Cruz clipped the badge to her coat lapel and moved toward the entrance, but Thompson's voice stopped her before she reached the doors. "Master Sergeant, one question. Do you know why you received a personal invitation? These ceremonies usually send general notifications to department heads who then distribute information to their staff." The question revealed Thompson's experience with military ceremony protocols and his recognition that something about Cruz's invitation didn't follow the standard patterns he was familiar with. She paused, considering how much information to share about circumstances she found puzzling herself. "I honestly don't know," she said. "The invitation arrived at my apartment, not through official channels at the education center." Thompson exchanged a glance with Rodriguez that suggested they both found this unusual but not necessarily problematic. Military bureaucracy occasionally produced irregularities that had logical explanations, even when those explanations weren't immediately apparent to the people processing paperwork. "Well, enjoy the ceremony," Thompson said, stepping aside to allow her passage through the entrance. The interior of the convention center had been transformed into a dignified venue appropriate for recognizing military achievement. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform decorated with flags and official seals, while professional lighting cast everything in the kind of clear, formal illumination that suggested importance and gravity. The air carried the mingled sense of fresh flowers, polished wood, and the particular blend of cologne and starch that always seemed to accompany formal military gatherings. Cruz located Section C without difficulty, choosing a seat near the center of the row that would provide a clear view of the platform, while keeping her inconspicuous among the other invited guests. Around her, family members and base personnel settled into their assigned areas with the kind of respectful quiet that formal ceremonies demanded. She recognized a few faces from the education center, but felt no particular desire to engage in conversation before the event began. As the auditorium filled, Cruz observed the careful choreography of military ceremony preparation. Officers in dress uniforms moved between assignments with practiced efficiency, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards that such events required. The personnel being promoted today had earned their advancement through years of dedicated service, and the ceremony would acknowledge their achievements with the kind of formal recognition that military tradition demanded. Near the front of the auditorium, a group of junior officers clustered in animated conversation, their voices carrying easily across the space as they discussed their expectations for the ceremony and their predictions about future assignments for the personnel being promoted. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Captain James Foster, and Major Patricia Liu had positioned themselves where they could observe both the ceremony preparations and the arriving guests with the kind of interested attention that came from people comfortable with their status within military hierarchy. Mitchell, at 38, carried herself with the confident authority of someone whose career had followed a predictable and successful trajectory through increasingly responsible positions. Her dress uniform bore the ribbons and insignia that marked her as a competent staff officer with solid performance evaluations and reliable leadership skills. She had never served in combat zones, but had managed training programs and administrative responsibilities with the kind of professional competence that military organizations valued highly. Foster, slightly younger at 34, represented the new generation of military officers who had entered service during an era of technological advancement and evolving operational requirements. His background included intelligence analysis and strategic planning assignments that had provided him with broad exposure to military operations without direct combat experience. He approached his career with the systematic thinking that came from academic training combined with practical military education. Liu, at 36, had built her reputation through logistics and supply chain management, areas that required detailed attention to planning and coordination, but rarely generated the kind of dramatic stories that captured public attention. Her service record showed consistent excellence in ensuring that personnel and equipment reached their assigned destinations with appropriate timing and support, work that was essential to military effectiveness, but often invisible to people outside logistics specialties. Their conversation focused on the officers scheduled for promotion during the morning ceremony, with particular attention to advancement patterns and career development strategies that might provide insights applicable to their own professional goals. They discussed deployment opportunities, advanced education programs, and assignment preferences with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from people deeply embedded in military career development systems. The promotion board results this cycle were interesting, Mitchell observed, scanning through a program that listed the day's honorees. Several people moved up faster than I expected, based on their visible accomplishments. Foster nodded agreement. His attention focused on identifying promotion patterns that might suggest changing priorities within military advancement criteria. I noticed that too. Some of these officers seem to have accelerated timelines that don't match the standard progression through staff positions. Lou looked toward the section where family members were gathering, noting the mix of civilian guests and military personnel who had come to witness the ceremony. Maybe they had special assignments or deployments that aren't reflected in their standard personnel summaries. Sometimes combat experience or classified work creates different advancement opportunities. The observation reflected their understanding that military careers could follow non-traditional paths that weren't always visible to people without access to complete service records. They had all heard stories about personnel whose official biographies contained significant gaps or whose advancement seemed disconnected from their apparent experience levels. Mitchell's attention was caught by movement in Section C, where she noticed a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes sitting quietly among the invited guests. Something about the woman's posture and demeanor suggested military background despite her non-uniform status, but Mitchell couldn't place her within the base's organizational structure. "Do you recognize the woman in the gray coat, third row? Back in Section C?" Mitchell asked her companions, gesturing discreetly toward Cruz's location. Foster and Lou followed her gaze, studying Cruz with the kind of interested attention that came from people trying to solve social puzzles. Neither of them could identify her, though both agreed that something about her bearing suggested military experience. "She's probably family," Lou suggested. "Maybe a veteran herself, attending to support someone being promoted today." Foster shook his head slightly. "I don't think so. Look at how she's observing the ceremony preparations. That's not the attention pattern of a family member focused on one particular person. She's watching everything with the kind of professional interest that comes from people who understand military operations." Their speculation was interrupted by the arrival of the ceremony's senior leadership, a group of colonels and general officers who would preside over the promotion presentations. The assembled crowd rose automatically as the official party entered, their conversations falling silent in recognition of the formal beginning of the morning's events. Brigadier General Patricia Harrison led the official party with the kind of measured authority that came from 32 years of distinguished military service. At 57, she had earned her position through a combination of exceptional performance and increasingly challenging assignments, and demonstrated leadership in both peacetime and combat environments. Her dress uniform bore the ribbons and decorations that marked her as someone who had served with distinction in multiple theaters of operation. General Harrison's career had included command positions in Iraq and Afghanistan, staff assignments at the Pentagon, and educational roles at the Army War College that had provided her with comprehensive understanding of both tactical operations and strategic planning. She was known throughout the military community as someone who combined operational competence with genuine concern for the welfare of the personnel under her command. As the official party took their positions on the platform, General Harrison's gaze swept across the assembled audience with the kind of automatic assessment that senior military leaders performed instinctively. She noticed the mix of personnel types, the respectful attention of family members, and the professional bearing of military guests who had come to witness their colleagues' advancement. Her attention paused briefly on Section C, where something About one particular woman's posture and demeanor triggered a sense of recognition that she couldn't immediately place. The woman sat with the kind of alert stillness that suggested military training. Her attention focused on the ceremony preparations, with professional interest rather than casual curiosity. General Harrison had seen thousands of military personnel during her career and had developed the ability to recognize qualities that transcended uniform regulations or official positions. Something about the woman in civilian clothes suggested depths that weren't immediately apparent, but the ceremony's schedule required her attention to shift toward the formal proceedings that were about to begin. Colonel Robert Stevens, serving as ceremony coordinator, approached the podium with the measured dignity that formal military events demanded. At 49, Stevens had conducted dozens of promotion ceremonies and had perfected the balance between personal recognition and institutional tradition that made such events meaningful for participants while maintaining appropriate military protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of colors and the national anthem, Stevens announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. The ceremony began with the traditional elements that connected this particular event to the broader history of military service and recognition. Color guards presented flags with precision movements that had been practiced until they became automatic, while the assembled audience demonstrated respect through their attention and silence. Cruz stood with the rest of the audience, her hand placed over her heart during the national anthem with the unconscious precision that came from years of military service. Around her, family members and guests participated with varying levels of familiarity with military protocol, but she moved through the ceremony's opening rituals with the automatic responses that suggested extensive experience with formal military events. When the opening ceremonies concluded and the audience returned to their seats, Colonel Stevens began the individual recognition portions of the program. He called forward the first group of officers scheduled for promotion, reading brief biographies that highlighted their service accomplishments and career progression patterns. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, Captain Foster, and Major Liu watched these presentations with professional interest, noting the variety of assignments and achievements that had earned advancement for their colleagues. The biographical summaries provided insights into successful career development strategies while demonstrating the range of contributions that military organizations valued and rewarded. Notice how many of these promotions cite joint service assignments, Foster observed quietly. Inter-service cooperation seems to be increasingly important for advancement. Mitchell nodded agreement, making mental notes about career development patterns that might influence her own future assignment requests. And several of them mentioned advanced civilian education. The military is definitely emphasizing broader professional development beyond purely military training. Their conversation was interrupted by Colonel Stevens calling forward the next group of promotion recipients, including several officers whose biographical summaries mentioned assignments that seemed to involve unusual responsibilities or specialized training that wasn't explained in detail. Major David Richardson stepped forward to receive promotion to lieutenant colonel, his biography mentioning special operations liaison duties and classified interagency assignments, without providing specific details about the nature of his work. Colonel Stevens read the summary with the same professional dignity he brought to all the presentations, but the vague language suggested that Richardson's actual service history involved activities that couldn't be discussed in public forums. Liu leaned toward her companions with a puzzled expression. Special Operations Liaison? I've never heard of that career field. Mitchell shrugged slightly, her attention focused on Richardson's bearing and demeanor as he received his promotion certificate. There are probably a lot of military specialties that don't get much visibility outside the people directly involved in them. Foster watched Richardson return to his seat with the kind of interested attention that came from recognizing that military service sometimes involved responsibilities that remained hidden from general knowledge. Makes you wonder, what other kinds of assignments happen that we never hear about? The ceremony continued with additional promotions, each accompanied by biographical summaries that provided glimpses into the diverse range of responsibilities and achievements that characterize successful military careers. Some officers had followed traditional progression patterns through staff positions and command assignments, while others had taken less conventional paths that included specialized training and non-standard duty assignments. As the formal presentations continued, General Harrison found her attention repeatedly drawn back to the woman in Section C, whose bearing continued to suggest military background despite her civilian attire. Something about her posture and attention patterns felt familiar, but the general couldn't place her within the context of personnel she had encountered during her extensive career. The promotion ceremony reached its midpoint when Colonel Stevens called forward Captain Maria Santos for advancement to Major. Santos's biographical summary mentioned combat deployments, joint task force assignments, and completion of advanced military education programs that had prepared her for increased leadership responsibilities. Captain Santos has demonstrated exceptional leadership during 3 combat deployments, Stevens read from his prepared text. Her work with joint task forces in challenging operational environments has earned recognition for innovation and effectiveness under pressure. Santos received her promotion certificate with the kind of quiet dignity that suggested someone comfortable with recognition, but not dependent on external validation for professional satisfaction. Her advancement represented the kind of career progression that combined traditional military leadership development with exposure to contemporary operational challenges. Mitchell observed Santos's promotion with professional interest, noting the emphasis on combat experience and joint service assignments that seemed to characterize many of the day's advanced promotions. Combat deployments definitely seemed to accelerate advancement timelines, she commented to her companions. Foster nodded agreement, though his expression suggested some uncertainty about his own career development strategy. Makes me wonder if my intelligence analysis background provides the same kind of advancement opportunities as direct operational experience. Lou looked thoughtful as she considered the implications of what they were observing. Maybe the military is placing increased emphasis on personnel who have demonstrated effectiveness in actual operational environments rather than just training exercises and staff work. Their speculation was interrupted by an unexpected development in the ceremony's progression. Colonel Stevens had been reading through his list of promotion recipients with smooth efficiency, but suddenly he paused, his expression showing confusion, as he encountered information that didn't match his expectations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stevens said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been present during the earlier presentations. "I need to verify some information before continuing with our next presentation." The pause created a ripple of curious attention throughout the auditorium, as audience members tried to understand what might have caused the ceremony coordinator to interrupt the smooth flow of formal proceedings. General Harrison leaned forward. Slightly, her attention focused on Stevens, with the kind of alert concern that suggested she was prepared to address whatever issue had arisen. Stevens gestured toward an aide positioned near the platform, who hurried forward with a folder of documents that apparently contained additional information about the ceremony's remaining presentations. The aide whispered briefly in Stevens's ear, pointing toward specific pages in the folder while Stevens reviewed whatever details had created the confusion. After several moments of quiet consultation, Stevens straightened and addressed the audience with renewed confidence. "Thank you for your patience. We have a very special presentation to make this morning, one that requires some additional context." The announcement created heightened attention throughout the auditorium, as family members and military guests recognized that they were about to witness something beyond the routine promotion presentations that had characterized the ceremony. Thus far, General Harrison's expression showed interested surprise, suggesting that even senior leadership hadn't been fully informed about whatever special presentation was about to occur. We have with us today someone whose service to our nation has been extraordinary, though much of it has remained hidden from public recognition due to the classified nature of her assignments. Stevens continued. Master Sergeant Isabella Cruz, would you please join us on the platform? The announcement landed in the auditorium like a small explosion, creating an immediate shift in atmosphere as hundreds of people turned their attention toward Section C to locate the person Stevens had named. Cruz felt every gaze in the room focus on her location, but she remained seated, her expression showing surprise rather than expectation. Mitchell, Foster, and Lou exchanged glances of complete bewilderment, clearly struggling to understand how the middle-aged woman they had noticed earlier could be connected to anything deserving special ceremonial recognition. Their earlier speculation about her military background suddenly seemed inadequate to explain why she was being called forward for what Stevens had described as an extraordinary presentation. Master Sergeant Cruz, Stevens repeated, his voice carrying across the auditorium with gentle encouragement. Please join us. Cruz rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled, despite the obvious surprise she felt at being called forward. She had received an invitation to witness the ceremony, not to participate in it, and she clearly hadn't expected to become the focus of formal recognition. As she made her way toward the platform, moving through the aisles with quiet dignity. Despite the attention focused on her, General Harrison studied her with increasing interest. Something about Cruz's bearing and movement patterns was triggering memories that the general couldn't quite place, though the sense of recognition was growing stronger with each step. Cruz climbed the steps to the platform with steady confidence, positioning herself near Colonel Stevens with the kind of automatic attention to protocol that suggested extensive experience with formal military proceedings. Despite her obvious surprise at being called forward, she maintained the composed demeanor that had characterized her behavior throughout the morning. Stevens consulted his folder again, reading through information that was apparently more detailed and complex than the biographical summaries he had been presenting for the other promotion recipients. His expression showed growing amazement as he processed details that seemed to exceed his initial expectations about what the ceremony would include. Ladies and gentlemen, Stevens said finally, his voice carrying a note of awe that hadn't been present during any of the earlier presentations. Master Sergeant Cruz's service record includes assignments and achievements that most of us can barely imagine. The statement created complete silence throughout the auditorium, as audience members recognized that they were about to learn something significant about the woman who had been sitting quietly among them without drawing any particular attention to herself. General Harrison leaned forward with intense interest, her expression showing the kind of focused attention that suggested she was beginning to piece together information that would explain the growing sense of recognition she had been experiencing. Stevens continued reading from his folder, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent auditorium. Master Sergeant Cruz served with distinction in multiple classified operations during her 15-year career with Special Operations Command. Her assignments included deep reconnaissance missions, hostage rescue operations, and counter-terrorism activities in some of the world's most dangerous regions. The information landed with stunning impact, completely reframing everyone's understanding of the woman who had appeared to be simply another invited guest attending the ceremony. Mitchell, Foster, and Lou sat in shocked silence, their earlier assumptions about her significance crumbling as they processed the reality of what they were hearing. Her service record includes 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and 4 Purple Hearts earned during operations that saved countless lives and disrupted enemy activities across multiple theaters of operation. Stevens continued, his voice gaining strength as he read through the remarkable list of achievements. The accumulation of high-level combat decorations created a sense of amazement throughout the auditorium, as military personnel and family members alike recognized that they were learning about someone whose service had been extraordinary by any measure. Cruz stood quietly beside Stevens, her expression calm despite the dramatic revelation of information that had been hidden for security reasons. General Harrison felt the pieces of recognition finally clicking into place as Stevens read through Cruz's service record. She had heard briefings about some of these operations during her own career, had read classified reports that mentioned unnamed special operations, personnel who had performed with exceptional courage and effectiveness. The woman standing on the platform had been one of those shadowy figures whose contributions remain hidden from public knowledge. Stevens reached the climax of his presentation with obvious emotion in his voice. Master Sergeant Cruz's final operation involved infiltrating a terrorist compound to rescue hostages held for execution. Despite being wounded early in the mission, she continued fighting for 6 hours, holding off enemy forces until rescue helicopters could extract both the hostages and her wounded team members. The description of prolonged combat, while wounded, created complete silence throughout the auditorium, as people tried to comprehend the level of courage and determination that such actions required. Cruz maintained her composed demeanor, though. Something in her expression suggested that remembering those events remained difficult, despite the time that had passed. For her actions during that operation, Stevens said, his voice now carrying the full weight of ceremonial dignity, Master Sergeant Isabella Cruz was awarded the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military decoration for valor. The announcement struck the auditorium like lightning, creating a moment of stunned silence before spontaneous applause erupted from every section of the venue. People rose to their feet automatically, recognizing that they were in the presence of someone who represented the highest ideals of military service and personal courage. General Harrison stood with tears in her eyes, finally understanding why Cruz had seemed familiar. She had been present at the classified ceremony where Cruz received her Medal of Honor, but the recipient had been in dress uniform then, surrounded by the formal trappings of military recognition. Seeing her in civilian clothes, working quietly in an education center, had made recognition difficult until the full context was revealed. Cruz stood quietly amid the thunderous applause, her expression showing appreciation for the recognition while maintaining the humble dignity that characterized recipients of the nation's highest honor. She had clearly not expected this public acknowledgement of her service, but she accepted it with the grace that comes from people who understand that recognition reflects the sacrifices of many rather than the achievements of one individual. As the applause gradually subsided and the audience returned to their seats, Colonel Stevens prepared for the final element of the ceremony's unexpected presentation. Master Sergeant Cruz has been working quietly in our education center for the past 18 months, helping other service members pursue their academic goals, while maintaining the same dedication to service that characterized her combat career. The information provided context for her presence at Fort Richardson, while highlighting the continuation of her service in a different capacity. Many Medal of Honor recipients transition to assignments that utilize their experience and judgment, while allowing them to contribute to military effectiveness in non-combat roles. Stevens consulted his folder one final time before making the morning's most significant announcement. Today, in recognition of her extraordinary service and her continued dedication to the development of military personnel, Master Sergeant Cruz is being promoted to Sergeant Major, with assignment as the Senior Enlisted Advisor for Special Operations Training Command. The promotion announcement created another wave of applause, as audience members recognized that Cruz was receiving not only public acknowledgement of her previous service, but also advancement to one of the military's most prestigious enlisted positions. The assignment to Special Operations Training Command would utilize her experience to develop the next generation of special operations personnel. General Harrison approached Cruz with obvious emotion, carrying a small presentation box that contained the insignia for her new rank. "Sergeant Major Cruz," she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium through the podium microphone. "It is my honor to present you with these rank insignia and to thank you, on behalf of our entire nation, for your service and sacrifice." Cruz accepted the insignia box with quiet dignity, then surprised everyone by reaching inside her coat to retrieve something that had remained hidden throughout the morning's events. She withdrew a small ribbon rack, the pale blue fabric adorned with 13 white stars that immediately identified it as the Medal of Honor ribbon. The appearance of the actual Medal of Honor ribbon created complete silence throughout the auditorium, as people realized that Cruz had been carrying the symbol of her extraordinary service with her all morning, hidden beneath her civilian coat while enduring questions about her qualifications and significance. General Harrison recognized the ribbon immediately, her expression showing both amazement and respect as she realized that the woman she was honoring had been quietly carrying evidence of the nation's highest recognition for valor. "Sergeant Major, would you mind if we shared with everyone here what that ribbon represents?" Cruz looked out at the assembled audience, seeing faces that ranged from amazement to respect to complete bewilderment as people processed the reality of what they had witnessed. "This ribbon represents the Medal of Honor," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium. "It was awarded for actions taken during a mission to rescue hostages, but it really represents the courage and sacrifice of everyone who served alongside me." The humble response, deflecting individual recognition toward team achievement, exemplified the character that had earned her the nation's highest honor in the first place. General Harrison smiled with obvious admiration, recognizing in Cruz the same qualities of selfless service that had characterized her own distinguished career. As the ceremony concluded with final honors and the traditional recessional, audience remained standing in recognition of what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, Captain Foster, and Major Liu stood in stunned silence, processing the lesson they had received about assumptions, recognition, and the hidden depths of service that existed all around them. Cruz descended from the platform with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the morning, but now she carried herself as the sergeant major she had become, ready to begin the next phase of her service, developing the special operations personnel who would carry forward the traditions of courage and excellence that she had exemplified. The morning had begun with a woman seeking simply to witness other people's achievements, but it had become a powerful reminder that extraordinary service often wore ordinary clothes, and that the most remarkable people were frequently those who felt no need to announce their significance to the world. In a room full of military professionals, they had discovered that a legend had been sitting quietly among them, waiting not for recognition but simply for the opportunity to continue serving in whatever capacity her nation required. The reception hall adjacent to the Eisenhower Convention Center filled with the subdued murmur of post-ceremony conversations as military personnel and their families gathered for the traditional coffee service that followed formal promotion events. White-clothed tables displayed arrangements of pastries and beverages while uniformed servers moved efficiently between groups, ensuring that everyone had opportunities to congratulate the newly promoted officers and share in the celebratory atmosphere that such occasions demanded. Sergeant Major Isabella Cruz found herself at the center of attention that she had neither sought nor expected when she woke that morning. Small clusters of people approached her with expressions ranging from curious respect to obvious amazement, each wanting to express their appreciation for her service, while struggling to reconcile the quiet woman in civilian clothes with the extraordinary combat record that had been revealed during the ceremony. A group of senior non-commissioned officers had gathered near the coffee station, their conversation focused on processing what they had witnessed during the morning's unexpected revelations. First Sergeant Robert Kim, a 26-year veteran with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, shook his head slowly as he tried to understand how someone with Cruz's background had been working quietly in the education center without anyone recognizing her significance. "I've been at Richardson for 4 years," Kim said to his companions, Sergeant Major Patricia Wong and Master Sergeant David Lopez. "I've interacted with the education center staff dozens of times, and I never suspected we had a Medal of Honor recipient working there." Wong, whose own career included multiple combat deployments and command positions, looked across the reception area toward Cruz with obvious respect. That's probably exactly how she wanted it. Most people who've earned that level of recognition aren't looking for attention or special treatment. Lopez nodded agreement, his expression thoughtful as he considered the implications of what they had learned. Makes you wonder how many other people are walking around with extraordinary backgrounds that nobody knows about. We tend to assume we know what people are capable of based on their current assignments. Their conversation reflected a broader recognition among the military personnel present that the morning's events had challenged fundamental assumptions about how to recognize and understand the people serving alongside them. The revelation that someone of Cruz's stature had been present and unrecognized for 18 months raised uncomfortable questions about attention, awareness, and the tendency to overlook significance that didn't announce itself. Near the reception hall's main entrance, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood with Captain James Foster and Major Patricia Liu, their earlier confidence about understanding military hierarchy and advancement patterns now tempered by the humbling experience of having completely misjudged someone whose achievements dwarfed their own. The comfortable certainty they had felt during the ceremony's opening had been replaced by a more complex understanding of service and recognition. "I keep thinking about our conversation before the ceremony," Mitchell said quietly, her voice carrying embarrassment about their earlier speculation regarding Cruz's presence and significance. "We were analyzing promotion patterns and career development strategies while someone with the Medal of Honor was sitting 3 rows behind us." Foster stared into his coffee cup with the expression of someone processing an uncomfortable lesson about assumptions and awareness. "I was so focused on trying to understand advancement opportunities that I completely missed the fact that we were in the presence of someone who represents the absolute pinnacle of military achievement." Liu looked toward Cruz, who was engaged in quiet conversation with General Harrison near the reception area's center. "It's humbling to realize how much we don't know about the people around us." She's been helping soldiers with their education goals while carrying experiences that most of us can't even imagine. Their reflection highlighted the gap between theoretical knowledge about military service and actual understanding of what extraordinary dedication looked like in practice. They had spent the morning discussing career development strategies while failing to recognize that authentic leadership and genuine achievement were sitting quietly among them, requiring no announcement or special recognition to maintain their dignity and worth. Across the reception hall, a group of junior enlisted personnel had gathered around Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, whose promotion to Sergeant First Class had been overshadowed by the morning's dramatic revelations about Cruz, rather than feeling diminished by the unexpected focus on another service member. Santos seemed energized by the example of sustained excellence that Cruz represented. "Did you hear the details about that hostage rescue operation?" Santos asked her companions, Specialist Jennifer Park and Corporal Michael Rodriguez. 6 hours of continuous combat while wounded, holding off enemy forces until everyone could be evacuated safely. Park, whose own deployment experience included convoy security and base defense duties, tried to imagine the level of physical and mental endurance that such sustained combat would require. "I can barely comprehend fighting for 6 hours under normal circumstances, much less while wounded and responsible for other people's survival." Rodriguez, who had recently completed his first overseas assignment, looked thoughtful as he processed the scale of courage and determination that Cruz's actions represented. And then she comes back and works quietly in an education center, helping other people pursue their goals without ever mentioning what she's accomplished. Their conversation reflected the inspiration that many junior personnel felt when encountering examples of service that transcended personal advancement or recognition. Cruz's willingness to transition from extraordinary combat achievements to supporting other people's development demonstrated a form of leadership that extended far beyond rank or position. Near the reception hall's windows, a group of civilian employees from various base departments stood together, their expressions showing amazement as they processed the revelation that someone they had interacted with professionally possessed such extraordinary military credentials. Janet Morrison from the Education Center looked particularly stunned as she recalled countless routine interactions with Cruz that had given no hint of her remarkable background. She helped me navigate the bureaucracy when my son was applying for military academies, Morrison said to her colleagues from personnel and logistics departments. She knew exactly which forms to file and which offices to contact, but I assumed her knowledge came from working in education, not from 15 years of special operations experience. Thomas Chun from the personnel department nodded with obvious amazement. I processed her assignment paperwork when she transferred to Richardson. Her file showed standard administrative duties with no indication of her actual service history. Everything must have been classified at levels I don't have access to. Rebecca Taylor from the base logistics office looked toward Cruz with new understanding of interactions that had seemed routine at the time. She came to my office several times to help students who were having problems with housing or meal plan issues. She knew exactly how to advocate for them within the system, but she was so quiet and professional that I never thought about what kind of experience might have taught her those skills. Their recognition highlighted the invisible nature of much military service, particularly special operations work that remained classified long after the personnel involved had transitioned to different assignments. Cruz had been applying skills developed during extraordinary circumstances to help with ordinary problems, using her experience to navigate bureaucracy and advocate for people who needed assistance. General Patricia Harrison moved to the reception area with practiced grace, ensuring that she spoke personally with as many attendees as possible, while paying particular attention to the newly promoted officers who deserved recognition for their own achievements. However, her attention repeatedly returned to Cruz, whose unexpected presence had transformed what she had anticipated would be a routine ceremony into something far more significant. As Harrison approached Cruz's location near the center of the reception area, she reflected on the classified briefings she had attended years earlier regarding the hostage rescue operation that had earned Cruz her Medal of Honor. At the time, she had been a colonel serving on a joint task force that coordinated special operations activities across multiple theaters, and she had read the after-action reports that documented the mission's extraordinary success despite overwhelming odds. Sergeant Major Cruz, Harrison said as she joined the small group that had gathered around the newly promoted senior enlisted leader. I wanted to express my personal gratitude for your service and to tell you how honored we are to have you joining the Special Operations Training Command Team. Cruz accepted the sentiment with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the morning's events. Thank you, General. I'm looking forward to contributing to the development of future special operations personnel. Harrison studied Cruz's expression, recognizing the authentic commitment to service that had characterized her entire career. Your experience will be invaluable in preparing the next generation for the challenges they'll face. The training program will benefit enormously from having someone who's actually lived through the situations we're trying to prepare people for. The conversation touched on the fundamental challenge of military training, how to prepare personnel for extraordinary circumstances, using simulations and exercises that could only approximate the reality of actual operations. Cruz's background provided a bridge between theoretical preparation and practical application that would enhance the Effectiveness of training programs significantly. Major Elizabeth Turner, who served as the Deputy Commander for Special Operations Training Command, had been listening to this conversation with obvious interest. At 39, Turner had built her career through a combination of staff assignments and limited special operations support roles, but she had never experienced the kind of direct combat that had characterized Cruz's service. "Sergeant Major, if I may ask," Turner said respectfully, "what aspects of current training do you think would benefit most from modification based on actual operational experience?" The question reflected Turner's professional interest in improving training effectiveness, but it also revealed her recognition that Cruz possessed insights that couldn't be acquired through any form of academic study or simulation-based preparation. Cruz considered the question carefully before responding. "Mental preparation is probably the most challenging aspect to train for," Cruz said thoughtfully. "You can simulate physical conditions and tactical scenarios, but the psychological pressure of actual combat, knowing that your decisions directly impact whether people live or die, is difficult to replicate in training environments." Turner nodded with obvious interest, recognizing that this perspective could influence fundamental approaches to special operations preparation. "How do you think we could better prepare people for that psychological reality?" Cruz looked toward the reception hall windows, her gaze focusing on something beyond the immediate surroundings, as she accessed memories from experiences that had tested every aspect of her training and preparation. "Stress inoculation helps, but ultimately people have to discover their own sources of strength when everything becomes overwhelming. Training can provide tools and techniques, but individuals have to develop the internal resources that sustain them when external support isn't available." The insight reflected hard-earned wisdom about human performance under extreme pressure, knowledge that had been acquired through circumstances that most people would never face. Harrison recognized the value of such perspective for developing training programs that prepared personnel not just for technical challenges, but for the psychological demands of special operations work. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Morrison, who served as the Training Command's operations officer, had approached during this conversation and listened with the focused attention of someone responsible for translating concepts into practical training applications. At 42, Morrison had extensive experience with special operations planning and support, but his assignments had primarily involved coordination and logistics rather than direct action. "Sergeant Major," Morrison said, "we've been working on modifications to our leadership development curriculum. Would you be willing to share your perspective on decision-making under pressure? Your experience could help us design scenarios that better prepare people for the reality of command responsibility in combat situations." The request acknowledged Cruz's unique qualifications while recognizing that her insights could enhance training effectiveness across multiple areas of special operations preparation. Cruz nodded agreement, clearly understanding that her new assignment would involve translating her experience into educational approaches that would benefit future personnel. "I'd be happy to contribute to curriculum development," she said simply. Leadership in combat involves different challenges than leadership in training environments. People need to understand how stress affects decision-making and how to maintain effectiveness when traditional support structures aren't available. Harrison felt satisfaction in hearing Cruz's willingness to share her experience for the benefit of future special operations personnel. The combination of extraordinary combat experience and demonstrated commitment to developing others would make Cruz an invaluable addition to the Training Command's leadership team. As the reception continued, word of Cruz's background and new assignments spread throughout the assembled military personnel, creating a subtle shift in atmosphere as people processed the significance of having someone with her credentials joining their professional community. The revelation that Fort Richardson would now host one of the military's most decorated combat veterans generated pride and anticipation about the opportunities for learning and development that her presence would provide. "Sergeant First Class, Kevin Walsh, who worked in the base's Special Operations Support Unit, approached Cruz with obvious respect and considerable nervousness about initiating conversation with someone whose achievements exceeded anything in his own experience. At 28, Walsh had completed several deployments and support roles, but had never participated in the kind of direct action missions that had characterized Cruz's career. "Sergeant Major," Walsh said, his voice carrying the respectful tone that protocol demanded when addressing senior enlisted personnel, "I wanted to express my gratitude for your service and to say how much I'm looking forward to learning from your experience." Cruz recognized the sincerity in Walsh's approach and responded with the kind of genuine attention that she gave to all military personnel seeking guidance or mentorship. "Thank you, Sergeant First Class. What's your background and current assignment?" Walsh explained his role in Special Operations Support, his deployment experience, and his interest in developing his skills and knowledge to better contribute to mission effectiveness. Cruz listened with the focused attention that suggested she understood the importance of every person's contribution to overall operational success. "Support roles are absolutely critical to special operations effectiveness," Cruz said, acknowledging the value of Walsh's contributions. "The success of direct action missions depends entirely on the competence and dedication of personnel who handle logistics, communications, intelligence, and administrative support." The recognition meant a great deal to Walsh, who sometimes felt that support roles received less acknowledgement than direct combat positions. Cruz's validation of his work came from someone whose perspective had been earned through experiences that demonstrated the absolute importance of comprehensive team effectiveness. Master Sergeant Diana Foster, who supervised the base's military police operations, had been observing Cruz throughout the reception with professional interest in understanding how someone with her background approached interpersonal interactions and leadership dynamics. Foster's own career included law enforcement training and security responsibilities, but she was curious about how combat experience influenced approaches to leadership and personnel development. "Sergeant Major Cruz," Foster said as she joined the conversation, "I'd be interested in your perspective on leadership transition. How do you adjust leadership approaches when moving from combat operations to training and development roles?" The question reflected Foster's understanding that different environments required different leadership styles, but she was curious about how someone with Cruz's background adapted their approach to meet the needs of personnel in non-combat situations. Cruz considered the question carefully, recognizing its complexity and importance for anyone seeking to understand effective leadership across different contexts. Combat leadership often focuses on immediate decisions and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances, she said thoughtfully. Training and development leadership requires more patience and attention to individual learning processes. Foster nodded with obvious interest, recognizing that this perspective could influence her own approach to supervising personnel who were developing their skills and experience. "Do you think combat experience provides advantages for understanding what people need in order to perform effectively under pressure?" "Experience helps with understanding how stress affects performance," Cruz replied, "but effective leadership in any context requires attention to individual differences and recognition that people develop confidence and competence at different rates." The insight reflected Cruz's understanding that leadership effectiveness depended on adapting approaches to meet the needs of specific situations and individuals rather than applying uniform methods regardless of circumstances. Colonel Jennifer Martinez, who served as Fort Richardson's deputy commander, had been circulating through the reception area and approached Cruz with obvious interest in discussing her transition to the Special Operations Training Command and her perspectives on military education and development priorities. "Sergeant Major Cruz," Martinez said, "I understand you'll be working closely with our education center as part of your new assignment. How do you see the relationship between Formal education and practical experience in developing effective military leaders. The question touched on fundamental issues regarding military professional development and the balance between academic learning and experiential knowledge that effective leaders needed to acquire. Cruz recognized the importance of this balance. From her own career progression and her recent work in the education center, both components are essential, Cruz said directly. Formal education provides frameworks for understanding complex situations and systematic approaches to problem solving. Practical experience teaches adaptation and develops the confidence needed to make decisions when information is incomplete. Martinez nodded agreement, recognizing that Cruz's perspective combined both elements: extensive, practical experience supplemented by the kind of continuous learning that effective military professionals pursued throughout their careers. Your work in the education center has given you insights into how military personnel approach their development goals. Martinez continued. What patterns have you observed regarding motivation and learning preferences? Cruz's expression showed appreciation for Martinez's recognition that her 18 months in the education center had provided valuable insights into military personnel development beyond her combat experience. People are most motivated when they understand how their learning connects to their ability to contribute effectively to mission success, she observed. The insight reflected Cruz's understanding that effective education and training needed to demonstrate clear connections between learning objectives and practical applications that would enhance job performance and mission effectiveness. As the reception began to wind down, General Harrison gathered the senior leadership present for informal discussions about integrating Cruz into her new role and maximizing the benefits that her experience could provide to the Special Operations Training Command's mission. The conversation included practical considerations regarding assignment responsibilities and broader strategic thinking about enhancing training effectiveness. Sergeant Major Cruz brings a unique combination of operational experience and educational background that will enhance our training program significantly, Harrison said to the assembled leadership team. Her transition to this role represents an opportunity to improve our preparation of special operations personnel based on actual mission experience. Lieutenant Colonel Turner expressed enthusiasm about the opportunities for collaboration that Cruz's assignment would create. Her insights into psychological preparation and leadership under pressure could influence multiple aspects of our curriculum development. Major Morrison nodded agreement, recognizing that Cruz's experience could inform everything from individual skill development to team coordination and leadership training. Having someone who's actually lived through the situations we're trying to prepare people for will add credibility and practical relevance to our training programs. Colonel Martinez looked toward Cruz with obvious respect for her willingness to take on responsibilities that would utilize her experience for the benefit of future military personnel. Your commitment to developing others represents the best traditions of military service, using your experience to ensure that the next generation is better prepared for the challenges they'll face. Cruz accepted these expressions of confidence and support with characteristic humility, recognizing that her new role would require different skills than her previous assignments, but understanding that her experience could contribute meaningfully to military education and training effectiveness. As the reception concluded and personnel began departing for their afternoon duties, Cruz found herself reflecting on the unexpected nature of the morning's events and the opportunities that her new assignment would provide. She had arrived expecting to witness other people's achievements and had instead found herself receiving recognition and advancement that would allow her to contribute to military effectiveness in entirely new ways. The transition from 18 months of quiet service in the education center to a high-profile role in special operations training represented both opportunity and challenge. Her experience qualified her uniquely for the responsibilities she would assume. But the visibility and expectations that came with her new position would require adaptation to different professional demands. General Harrison approached Cruz as the reception area began to clear, her expression showing both professional satisfaction and personal respect for the morning's developments. "Sergeant Major, I wanted to speak with you privately about your transition to the training command and the expectations for your new role." Cruz recognized the importance of this conversation and gave Harrison her complete attention, understanding that clear communication about responsibilities and expectations would be essential for effectiveness in her new position. "Your assignment will involve multiple components," Harrison began. "Curriculum development, instructor training, leadership mentorship, and direct interaction with students who are preparing for special operations careers. Each area will draw on different aspects of your experience and require different approaches to sharing your knowledge effectively." Cruz nodded understanding, recognizing that her new role would be more complex and multifaceted than her previous assignments. "I understand that translating combat experience into educational content requires different skills than direct operational leadership." Harrison appreciated Cruz's recognition of this challenge. "Exactly. Your credibility with students and instructors will be enormous because of your background, but effectiveness in this role will depend on your ability to communicate complex concepts and help people learn from your experience without having to replicate your specific circumstances." The insight highlighted the fundamental challenge that many experienced military personnel faced when transitioning to training and educational roles: how to share knowledge and wisdom gained through extraordinary circumstances in ways that would benefit people who might never face identical situations. "Your work will influence the preparation of special operations personnel for years to come," Harrison continued. "The training and development programs you help create will shape how future military leaders approach their responsibilities and handle the challenges they encounter." Cruz understood the long-term significance of her new assignment and felt the weight of responsibility that came with opportunities to influence military effectiveness and personnel development at a systematic level. Her individual combat achievements had saved lives and completed important missions, but her new role offered the possibility of improving preparation for countless future operations. As they concluded their conversation and Cruz prepared to leave Fort Richardson's promotion ceremony behind, she reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her from combat operations through quiet service in an education center to a prominent role in military training and development. Each phase of her career had required different skills and offered different opportunities to contribute to military effectiveness and the welfare of the personnel she served alongside. The morning's events had demonstrated that recognition and advancement could come unexpectedly, that service excellence often went unnoticed until circumstances required its revelation, and that true military leadership involved constant adaptation to new challenges and responsibilities. Cruz's willingness to accept each assignment and perform to the best of her ability, regardless of visibility or recognition, had ultimately led to opportunities that would allow her to share her experience for the benefit of future military personnel. Walking toward her vehicle in the Fort Richardson parking area, Cruz carried herself with the quiet confidence that had characterized her throughout the morning's surprising events. She was no longer Master Sergeant Cruz working quietly in an education center, but Sergeant Major Cruz beginning a new phase of service that would utilize her extraordinary experience to enhance the preparation of special operations personnel for the challenges they would face in defending their nation. The autumn afternoon carried the crisp promise of changing seasons, much like the changes that were occurring in Cruz's own career trajectory. Her Medal of Honor would no longer remain hidden beneath civilian clothes, and her combat experience would no longer be relegated to classified files that prevented recognition of her achievements and qualifications. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve. But today had provided a powerful reminder that military service took many forms, that excellence often worked quietly without seeking recognition, and that the most valuable contributions frequently came from people whose significance wasn't immediately apparent to others. The promotion ceremony at Fort Richardson had begun as a routine celebration of military advancement and had become something more significant, a lesson about recognition, service, and the extraordinary people who walked among ordinary circumstances, carrying extraordinary experience and maintaining extraordinary dedication to something larger than themselves. As Cruz drove away from the base, she carried with her not only new rank insignia and assignment orders, but also the satisfaction that came from knowing her experience would continue to serve her nation through the development of future military leaders. The recognition she had received was meaningful, but the opportunity to contribute to military effectiveness and personnel development represented the true value of the morning's unexpected events. Her story would continue in new contexts with new responsibilities, but the principles that had guided her throughout her career, dedication to service, commitment to excellence, and focus on something larger than personal advancement, would remain constant as she adapted to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. 3 months later, the Special Operations Training Command facility at Fort Richardson buzzed with the focused intensity that characterized serious military education. The modern classroom complex had been designed specifically for advanced tactical instruction, featuring simulation centers, briefing rooms, and specialized training areas that could replicate the challenging environments where special operations personnel would eventually serve. Sergeant Major Isabella Cruz stood before a classroom of 24 military personnel representing every branch of service, each selected for their potential to serve in special operations roles. The students ranged from seasoned non-commissioned officers seeking to expand their capabilities to younger personnel who had demonstrated exceptional aptitude during initial screening processes. Their faces showed the kind of focused attention that came from people who understood they were receiving instruction that could determine their effectiveness in life or death situations. Cruz had adapted to her new role with the same methodical dedication she brought to every assignment, but the transition from individual operator to instructor and mentor had required significant adjustment in approach and perspective. Teaching others how to make decisions under extreme pressure demanded different skills than making those decisions herself, and she had spent considerable time developing methods for sharing knowledge that had been acquired through experience, rather than formal study. The morning's lesson focused on leadership during crisis situations, a topic that drew directly from Cruz's operational background, while addressing challenges that every special operations leader would eventually face. Rather than simply describing theoretical principles, she used case studies from actual missions to illustrate how leadership decisions affected outcomes and how effective leaders adapted their approaches to meet changing circumstances. Leadership under pressure isn't about having all the answers, Cruz said, her voice carrying the authority that came from someone who had lived through the situations she was describing. It's about maintaining clarity of thought when everything around you is chaos, and helping your team focus on what they can control rather than becoming overwhelmed by what they can't. Captain Michael Torres, a former infantry officer seeking qualification for special operations assignment, raised his hand with obvious interest in exploring this concept further. Sergeant Major, how do you maintain that clarity when you're dealing with incomplete information and rapidly changing conditions? The question reflected Torres's understanding that real-world operations rarely provided the complete situational awareness that training exercises could offer. Cruz appreciated his recognition of this fundamental challenge and used it as an opportunity to address one of the most difficult aspects of operational leadership. You learn to make the best decisions possible with available information while remaining flexible enough to adapt when circumstances change, she replied. Perfect information is a luxury that combat operations rarely provide, so effective leaders develop comfort with uncertainty and focus on maintaining forward momentum rather than waiting for ideal conditions. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Kim, whose background included intelligence analysis and reconnaissance experience, looked thoughtful as she processed this perspective. That seems to require a significant shift in mindset from training environments, where we usually have access to comprehensive briefings and detailed operational plans. Cruz nodded agreement, recognizing that Kim had identified one of the key challenges in preparing personnel for the reality of special operations work. Training provides frameworks and procedures that are essential foundations, but operational effectiveness requires the ability to adapt those frameworks when reality doesn't match planning assumptions. The discussion continued as Cruz guided the students through scenarios that required them to apply leadership principles to complex, ambiguous situations where multiple factors competed for attention and resources were limited. Each exercise built on previous lessons while introducing new variables that force students to think beyond standard responses and develop adaptive problem-solving capabilities. Master Sergeant David Rodriguez, whose experience included multiple combat deployments in conventional forces, struggled with scenarios that required rapid decision-making without the support structures he was accustomed to having available. "This is more challenging than I expected," he admitted during a brief break between exercises. "I'm used to having clear chains of command and established procedures for most situations." Cruz recognized Rodriguez's difficulty as representative of the broader challenge that many experienced military personnel faced when transitioning to special operations roles. Special operations often require independent decision-making in situations where conventional support isn't available, she explained. That independence can feel uncomfortable at first, but it becomes natural with practice and experience. The afternoon session shifted focus to team dynamics and the psychological aspects of maintaining unit cohesion during extended operations under stressful conditions. Cruz drew from her experience leading teams through situations where traditional military hierarchy was less important than mutual trust and shared commitment to mission success. "In special operations, rank matters less than competence and reliability," she told the assembled students. "When your life depends on the person next to you, what matters is their ability to perform under pressure, not their position on an organizational chart." Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, a naval officer with experience in underwater demolition work, found this concept both liberating and challenging. "How do you balance respect for military hierarchy with the kind of flexible leadership that special operations seems to require?" The question touched on one of the fundamental tensions in military organization, the need for clear authority structures balanced against the requirement for adaptive leadership in dynamic situations. Cruz had navigated this balance throughout her career and understood its complexity. Effective special operations leaders understand when to rely on formal authority and when to lead through expertise and example, she replied. "The key is reading situations accurately and adapting your approach to what the circumstances require rather than defaulting to rigid adherence to protocol." As the training day concluded, Cruz reflected on the progress her students were making and the challenges they still faced in developing the mental flexibility that special operations work demanded. Each individual brought different strengths and experiences to their training, but all needed to develop comfort with ambiguity and confidence in their ability to make effective decisions under pressure. The success of her teaching methods had not gone unnoticed by the Special Operations Training Command leadership. Colonel Jennifer Martinez had observed several of Cruz's classes and was impressed by her ability to translate complex, experiential knowledge into practical lessons that students could understand and apply. "Your students consistently perform better on practical exercises than previous classes," Martinez told Cruz during their weekly review meeting. "Whatever you're doing to help them develop decision-making skills is working." Cruz appreciated the recognition but remained focused on areas where her teaching methods could be improved. "They're learning to trust their judgment and adapt to changing conditions," but some still struggle with the psychological pressure of independent operation. Martinez nodded understanding, recognizing that the mental aspects of special operations work were often more challenging than the physical or technical components. Your experience gives you credibility with students that academic instructors can't match. They know you've actually faced the situations you're preparing them for. The conversation touched on broader questions about military training effectiveness and the value of experiential knowledge in educational settings. Cruz's success as an instructor demonstrated the importance of having educators who had lived through the experiences they were teaching others to navigate. General Patricia Harrison had been monitoring Cruz's transition to her new role and was pleased with both her adaptation to teaching responsibilities and her impact on training program effectiveness. During their monthly meeting, Harrison expressed satisfaction with the improvements in student performance and preparation that Cruz's instruction was producing. Your classes are producing special operations personnel who demonstrate better judgment and more effective leadership than we've seen in previous training cycles, Harrison told Cruz. The combination of your operational experience and your commitment to teaching is exactly what our program needed. Cruz felt satisfaction in knowing that her work was contributing to improved preparation for future special operations personnel. But she remained focused on continuous improvement in her teaching methods and curriculum development. The students are motivated to learn, which makes teaching more effective. They understand that what they're learning here will directly impact their ability to succeed in operational environments. Harrison appreciated Cruz's focus on practical relevance and her understanding of what motivated adult learners in military contexts. Your approach to connecting theoretical concepts with real-world applications helps students understand why they're learning specific skills and how those skills will serve them in actual operations. The discussion evolved to include longer-term planning for Cruz's role and the potential for expanding her responsibilities within the training command. Her success as an instructor had created opportunities for involvement in curriculum development, instructor training, and program evaluation that would utilize her experience in new ways. As winter settled over Fort Richardson, Cruz established routines that balanced her teaching responsibilities with continued professional development and personal well-being. The demands of her new role were different from those of her operational career, but they required the same dedication to excellence and attention to detail that had characterized her service throughout her military career. Her students had formed a tight-knit group that supported each other through the challenges of special operations, training while maintaining the individual excellence that their future responsibilities would require. Cruz took pride in watching them develop confidence in their abilities and trust in their judgment as they progressed through increasingly complex scenarios. The recognition she had received during the promotion ceremony had led to invitations to speak at military conferences and participate in professional development programs that drew on her experience and expertise. These opportunities allowed her to share insights about special operations training and leadership development with broader military audiences while continuing to refine her understanding of effective educational methods. One such speaking engagement took her to the Army War College, where she addressed a class of senior military officers studying strategic leadership and organizational development. Her presentation focused on the relationship between individual excellence and team effectiveness, drawing from her experience leading special operations teams through challenging missions. Individual competence is essential, but mission success depends on how effectively individuals work together under pressure, she told the assembled officers. The best special operations teams are composed of people who trust each other completely and can adapt their roles based on changing mission requirements. The discussion that followed her presentation revealed the interest that senior military leaders had in understanding how to develop and maintain high-performance teams in challenging environments. Cruz's experience provided practical insights that complemented the theoretical frameworks that the officers were studying as part of their advanced education. Her influence extended beyond formal teaching environments and mentoring relationships. With individual military personnel who sought guidance about career development and professional challenges, Cruz made herself available to anyone who wanted to learn from her experience, understanding that informal mentoring often provided opportunities for the most meaningful knowledge transfer. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, who was considering applying for special operations training, met with Cruz regularly to discuss the mental and physical preparation that such training required. Gonzalez appreciated having access to someone who could provide realistic expectations about the challenges she would face and practical advice about how to prepare effectively. The physical requirements are demanding, but the mental challenges are what separate successful candidates from those who don't complete the program, Cruz told Gonzalez during one of their mentoring sessions. Mental toughness isn't about being immune to stress. It's about maintaining effectiveness despite stress and helping your teammates do the same. These conversations reinforced Cruz's understanding of her role as something larger than formal instruction. Her presence at Fort Richardson provided a resource for military personnel who needed guidance, encouragement, and realistic perspective about challenging career decisions and professional development opportunities. As spring approached, Cruz reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her from combat operations through quiet service in an education center to her current role as a senior instructor and mentor. Each phase of her career had required different skills and offered different opportunities to serve, but all had been unified by her commitment to excellence and dedication to something larger than personal advancement. The Medal of Honor that had remained hidden during her months of anonymous service now served as a daily reminder of the responsibilities that came with recognition and the expectations that others had for her continued service. Rather than feeling burdened by these expectations, Cruz found them motivating, understanding that her experience created obligations to share what she had learned for the benefit of future military personnel. Her students were approaching graduation from their initial special operations training, and Cruz felt pride in their development and confidence in their preparation for the challenges they would face in operational assignments. They had learned not only technical skills and tactical procedures, but also the mental resilience and adaptive thinking that would serve them throughout their careers. The success of her teaching had led to requests from other military installations for her assistance in developing special operations training programs and improving instructor effectiveness. These opportunities would allow her to extend her influence beyond Fort Richardson while continuing to contribute to military education and personnel development at a broader level. As she prepared for the next phase of her service, Cruz maintained the same quiet confidence and dedication to excellence that had characterized her entire military career. The recognition she had received had created new opportunities and responsibilities, but her fundamental commitment to serving something larger than herself remained unchanged. The morning sun illuminated the Fort Richardson training facilities, where her students were conducting their final exercises, demonstrating the skills and judgment they had developed through months of intensive preparation. Cruz watched their performance with satisfaction, knowing that her contribution to their development would continue to serve the nation through their future service in special operations roles. Her story had evolved from individual achievement through quiet service to influential teaching and mentoring, but each chapter had been unified by the same principles of dedication, excellence, and selfless service that define the best traditions of military service. The Medal of Honor she wore had been earned through extraordinary courage in a single mission, but her continued service demonstrated that true honor came from sustained commitment to serving others and contributing to something larger than personal recognition or advancement. The students she had taught would carry forward not only the technical skills and tactical knowledge, She had shared, but also the example of how authentic leadership worked quietly and effectively to develop others and improve organizational effectiveness. Her influence would multiply through their service and the leadership they would provide to future generations of military personnel. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.